Start now.
Great.
Hello everybody, sorry for the delay there, we had some technical issues, but welcome for those of you who have persevered. Welcome to our event Stag Beetle Talk, one of our series of natural history talks from the Ecology service. My name is Matthew, I'm one of the education officers at the Ecology Centre, and I'll very shortly hand over to Lawyer Bauer from People's Trust for Endangered Species. I would also like to, before we go on, just say that if you have any questions, pop them in the Q&A function and I'll present them to Laura at the end of the talk. And also we should say a big thank you to the Friends of Holland Park for sponsoring this event. Right, and over to you, Laura. Thank you very much.
Hi everybody, thank you very much for waiting. We had a few issues, as Matthew said. I hope you can all hear me okay. I'm going to talk about stag beetles today. My name's Laura Bauer and I'm Conservation Officer at the People's Trust for Endangered Species. And I manage our nature reserves and I also manage our beetle projects, one of which is the Stag Beetle project. So first of all, I wanted to tell you a little bit about People's Trust for Endangered Species, and then I'll go on and tell you all about stag beetles. So People's Trust for Endangered Species has been going about 40 years now, and we fund conservation projects across the world. It was set up as a funding body initially, and here's some of the dots on the map, which shows you whereabouts we're funding projects. We fund practical conservation work and also research into endangered species from Tanzania all the way over to Mongolia. We also run our own projects and campaigns in the UK, which have a mammal focus mainly. You may have heard of our Hedgehog Street project, which is where we've asked people to get involved in hedgehog conservation in their gardens and get their neighbours and friends involved to do the same to make a bigger impact. We've also funded, you may have seen on the One show, Henry the Sniffer Dog, who was searching for hedgehogs using his nose. And that was to help find hedgehogs where there was developments going on and move them to a safe place. And the next thing, he was very successful, and the next thing he was going to do is learn how to find hibernating hedgehogs. As you can see, we're also funding a project on Scottish wildcats, a reintroduction. Our overseas projects include these beautiful giraffes and this lovely interesting looking El Rincon stream frog. So you can see they're very varied projects that we fund. And really talking about this was just an excuse to show you some nice pictures really. The nature reserves that I manage, one's in Worcestershire and it's a very, very old orchard. As you can see, some very old apple trees there with lots of mistletoe, and it's on the banks of the River Avon, and it's fantastic for deadwood invertebrates. That seems to be a theme running through the projects that I look after, insects that like dead wood. This is our Bridlesford Reserve, which is a woodland on the Isle of Wight, and it's a triple SI for its floral diversity, and it's also an SAC, which is a special area of conservation, and that is for the bat interest. Lots of rare bats live there, and we also have dormice and red squirrels too. So these are just some of the projects we fund. Hedgehog Street I set up 10 years ago, and we have, I think, about 90,000 people involved now. So that was a fantastic achievement really, getting people involved in hedgehog conservation and knowing all about hedgehogs. I'll just race through a little bit more about what we do. We have a traditional orchard project. Traditional orchards are amazing for wildlife because of the trees, because of the grazed ground, and the kind of plenty of different habitats that they have all in one small space. And we started by looking at aerial photographs and looking where orchards were. You can see them very clearly on an aerial photograph. And we did a map of the whole of England, and it's since spread to Wales and Scotland as well. And then we asked volunteers to go out for us and ground truth those results, see if the orchards were still there and what condition they were in. So that's another thing that we do. And then last but not least is our education. We try and attend fairs and shows and do talks like this to tell you a little bit more about our work and hopefully show you the ways that you can get involved in conservation as well. So I'll definitely be telling you towards the end of the talk lots of different things that you can do to help stag beetles. So here's the famous stag beetle. I think it's a beautiful photo here with a toad. I'm not sure if that was posed or not, but we've been working with stag beetles since 1994 when the UK BAP was published, the Biodiversity Action Plan, and stag beetles were one of the species on that plan. And in 1998, the People's Trust for Endangered Species became the lead partner. So we were responsible for the action plan for stags. So we've been working with them quite a long time now. So what is a stag beetle? I don't know if everyone watching is based in London, but if you are, you've probably seen a stag beetle. Maybe, maybe not, I don't know. Usually if I was doing a live talk, I'd ask for a show of hands, but I can't do that here. So here's a nice picture of a male and female side by side. My husband actually took this photo in our garden, so we did put them together, this male and this female, but they were in the garden at the same time. And as you can see there, they're very large terrestrial beetles, so they live on land. They've got these distinctive chestnut coloured wing cases. They're not really black, their head is black and the thorax, the middle section, but the wing cases are this nice shiny chestnut colour. And the males have huge jaws which look like antlers really, which is why they're called stag beetles. And the males can be up to about 8 centimetres long, and females are a bit smaller, up to about 5 centimetres long, and their antlers aren't as big. Their jaws are just the small ones that you can see on the screen there. And these beetles can fly, even though they're large. They've got under those wing cases, the wings pop out and they can fly. Although you do tend to see females walking more than flying. If you see a flying stag beetle, it's usually a male. And they depend on deadwood for a lot of their life, and they're only seen as adults in this state for a few weeks of the year. And usually they're seen, well, usually we would have started seeing some stag beetles by now, but we've had such cold, rainy, windy weather that we haven't really had many sightings reported to us yet. So May, June and July, on warm, sort of sunny evenings, that's when you're likely to see them. So, there are some other beetles that can be confused with stags. There's another stag beetle in this country called the lesser stag beetle, and it is a lot smaller. If you see them side by side, there's no mistaking it, but when they're on their own, it can be hard to tell. Now the lesser stag beetle is only about 2 centimetres long, so really tiny compared to the stag anyway. And they're a matte black colour rather than this shiny chestnut. The cockchafer can also, or the maybug can also be mistaken for a stag beetle because they've got a similar flight, even though they don't look that similar when you see them still and landed. They're quite big, quite large, and they do a kind of buzzing, bumbling flight. So they can be mistaken for them as well. Where do stag beetles live? Well, they can be in woodlands, woodland edges, wood pasture, urban and suburban gardens, basically anywhere with a good supply of rotting wood. They have been shown to particularly like oak trees, but they do nest in a different variety of species. So mainly broad-leafed wood. So those trees that lose their leaves in the winter. In Europe, it's a bit different. They tend to be seen more in woodlands rather than in gardens. But yeah, we're finding out more and more about stag beetles and how they're different across the range. So here's a nice picture of a larvae, juicy fat larva. They eat decaying wood for several years and build up their fat reserves so that when they become an adult, they don't need to eat. So adult stag beetles don't eat at all, but they do have this strange orange feathery tongue, and they can take moisture from saffrons and rotting fruit and things like that. So that's how they get a bit of moisture and energy. There are other similar larvae which you might find in the garden. Rose chafers, they're those beautiful green beetles that you sometimes see on your roses. And as you can see, they do look fairly similar, but rose chafer larvae are hairy. They've got very tiny legs. They're wider at the back end, and they're normally found in compost heaps. So the most obvious thing to start with is, where did you find it? And if it was in a compost, it was probably a rose chafer rather than a stag beetle. The cockchafer, again, they're a similar larvae, but they're mainly found under your lawn, and they feed on roots, not rotting wood. And they've got these quite distinctive long legs, a lot longer than a stag beetle larva. So we've got a nice guide on our website. I'll put a link to the website at the end of the talk, and yeah, you can have a look on there and refer to it if you find a larva and you don't know what it is. The lesser stag beetle larvae is obviously the most similar to a stag beetle, but they are smaller and they're found above ground, so they'll be in rotting wood and stumps above ground. They've got a slightly paler head. Obviously that's not obvious unless you've got them side by side. Their pincers are slightly straighter, and at the back where they've got this see-through part, the contents of their gut, what they've eaten, is pale rather than dark, because they're just eating wood and it's not mixed in with soil. So with stag beetles, it's dark because they've got soil as well as the wood, and in lesser stags it's pale, like this photo you can see here. So this is a beautiful illustration of their life cycle. It's a very, very long life cycle, and it can last anywhere from 3 to 5 years, and it depends on the climate. So periods of very cold weather can extend the life cycle by a year or two, and it also depends on what wood they're feeding on and how much beneficial nutrients it's got in it. So the female lays about 30 eggs up to about 30 centimetres underground, and she lays the eggs in the soil next to suitable rotting wood, and the larvae hatch after 3 weeks, and they move between the soil and the wood in periods of when they're active. They'll go into the wood and feed, and then they'll have periods where they're resting in the soil and they're not active, and they molt several times as they grow and get larger. And when it's the final year in the summer, they build a cocoon the size of an orange, and in the autumn they pupate, and then overwinter as an adult, and then they wait all that time for over the winter and into May, and then they have to dig their way out up to the surface, and then that's when they start their adult part of their life cycle, and they have to find a mate. And as I say, that only lasts a few weeks, really. Probably maximum of 6 weeks is the likelihood that you'll see them. So where are stag beetles? This is our UK distribution map. This is from, so the blue records are from 2019 and the black ones are previous records back to 2003. So you can see that they're kind of a southeasterly kind of beetle, but there are sightings, there have been sightings further north and west and into Wales as well. They prefer light soils, and they're not in chalky areas like the North and South Downs. They're kind of absent from those areas, and they prefer the areas with the highest average temperature and the lowest rainfall. They prefer warm areas and they don't like it too wet, basically. So stag beetles in London. London's a hotspot for stag beetles and they've been recorded from most boroughs of London. But they are more common in the south and the west, and there's hotspots in Wimbledon, Richmond and Bexley. I did a little map today from last year's records, and I put Holland Park on the map. I don't know how many of the people in the talk are linked with Holland Park, probably quite a lot of you. But yeah, I put a little map roughly where I thought Holland Park was, and as you can see, there are a lot more records to the south of that, but still there are records throughout London in little, in little hotspots. So that just shows you really where the distribution is. We're not quite sure why they're more southerly than northerly in London, but obviously they're fairly absent from the central areas of London where it's just built up and roads. So are stag beetles endangered? Well, they've seen their range, so where they are in the country, that's contracted or shrunk since the 1940s. And they've also undergone a decline all the way across Europe, and they've gone extinct in Denmark and Latvia. And I think they've actually done a reintroduction into Denmark now, but only into one area. So we don't know how well that's going to work out and whether they'll spread out from there or not. They're protected from sale in the UK under the law, and they're also a priority species for conservation, and they're red listed in many of the European countries. So they actually seem to be doing quite well here. Since they undergone their decline, they seem to be fairly stable now, and we're actually sort of a stronghold for them, where other countries are seeing these massive declines. So why is this? Well, we think it's to do with tidying up of gardens and parks and woodlands, people not retaining dead wood, clearing up and tidying up. Everyone thinks dead and decaying wood kind of means disease, and that it's bad for the environment, but it really isn't. It's a really good source of food and homes for lots and lots of different species. Obviously collection, people taking them from the wild, has been an issue in the past, because that's why they're protected from sale, although I'm not sure how big a problem that is now. They're affected by predators, obviously, and humans. We cause problems for them as well. Traffic is one of the problems. They're attracted to tarmac, so it's nice and warm there, and then they get squashed on the road or they get trampled underfoot. We're taking away their habitat, so it is a lot to do with humans. Different things eat stag beetles. Magpies tend to eat the adult beetles, and sometimes you can see just the heads left once several stag beetles have emerged, and you tend to see lots of just the head left because they're not very nice bits to eat. They've just eaten the rest of it, which is softer and more nutritious. And I think foxes can often dig up the larvae and find those and eat those for a snack. I'm not sure how whether pets would be a threat to stag beetles or not, but they may be, dogs and cats potentially. So why should we conserve stag beetles? Well, the law says we ought to. It's a priority species, but they're good in their own right because they eat the dead wood. The larvae munch and munch away on this dead and decaying wood under the ground, and they're actually recycling the nutrients back into the soil. So they provide a service for us. And what's good habitat for stag beetles is also good habitat for lots of other species as well. And we find that stag beetles are great for engaging people in conservation because they're quite, I don't know, I think they're charismatic species. They're big, they're easy to identify, and kids particularly love them. And, you know, if you've got a stag beetle in your hand, everyone wants to come and see it. So it's a great one for learning about dead wood and habitats and species and life cycles. So what have People's Trust for Endangered Species been doing about stag beetles apart from doing talks like this? Well, we've funded research over the years, over the last 15 to 20 years, and we've paid researchers from universities to do look into non-invasive monitoring methods, which basically means ways of looking for stag beetles without digging them up and ruining the habitat. So a lady called Deborah Harvey, working at Royal Holloway University, she was looking at how you could look for the not look for the pheromones, but how you could detect the pheromones and therefore find stag beetles, and that was successful. She was able to use a kind of chemical to detect the pheromone, and you could say yes, there was a stag beetle here, or no, there wasn't. She also looked into lures, so how you could attract stag beetles, and she found that ginger root was particularly attractive to stag beetles, so that might be one to try if you want to attract them. And she also looked into sound. So the larvae actually do this thing called stridulation, which is they're moving their legs against their body and it makes a vibrating noise, and we think that that's them communicating somehow with each other in the tree and or underground in the roots, and that we can also hear that using some very you know, advanced technology. You can hear that. So she found out lots of interesting things about stag beetles, and we're also funding and taking part in European-wide monitoring scheme. So I'll tell you a bit more about that later, and you can actually take part as well. We've been collecting stag beetle records via the Great Stag Hunt. If you Google Great Stag Hunt, you can have a look at how many records there have been this year, and you can tell us if you've seen a stag beetle yet, and upload a photo to our website and tell us all about your records. So we've been doing that for 20 odd years now, probably more, and we provide advice to the public on how to manage their gardens, what to do for stag beetles, what to do if you find one, and providing advice to managers of parks and gardens and woodlands and things like that about how to value dead wood and how to encourage stag beetles. And so, talking of the Great Stag Hunt, we had a bumper year last year, and we had 18,000 adults recorded, which is probably more than double the numbers we usually get. And I've put the numbers of males and females and larvae there, and it looks like the range is staying stable. The outlying populations are still present, and we also get sent in records that people think are stag beetles, but they're not, but they are other interesting species like longhorns, minotaurs and devil's coach horse beetles. So that's really interesting as well. And we had some new records from the edge of the range in places we hadn't seen them before, from Devon and Norfolk, which was really interesting. And the hotspots were pretty much the same as every year: London, Ipswich, Colchester, and also Brighton and Bournemouth, so down on the coast as well. So that's what last year's record told us. I think we had such a good year probably because of the COVID restrictions. People were staying at home, but taking more notice of wildlife and what's around them. So I hope that continues into the future and we get just as many records this year once the weather starts to get a bit better anyway. So how can you help stag beetles in your garden? Well, the most important thing is to think about sources of wood, dead wood underground. So leaving any tree stumps you can. If you have to cut down a tree or a tree is dead and dying, even if you have to remove most of the tree for safety reasons or just because you want to, try and leave the stump in place because it's the most important habitat for stag beetles. Any open water you need to cover if you can, like water butts and buckets, because they can fall in and not be able to escape. And if you've got a pond, it's important to have escape routes. So whether you put some logs in or some stones, but it's important for many different species that they have escape routes, hedgehogs as well. So that's really important. Try not to use the weed matting if you can, because although it stops the weeds coming through, it can also stop stag beetles being able to dig their way out of the soil, and they'll be trapped underground and die. Be careful when digging, because you may well find larvae or even adults at the right time of year. And try not to use chemicals if you can help it in your garden. I know that ant powder is quite a problem with stag beetles. When people put ant powder down, it tends to kill any stag beetles that walk through it or walk near it. So another way you can help is by taking part in our monitoring survey. Well, it's not ours actually. It was developed by kind of a group of people from different universities and organisations Europe-wide. And we want to look at how stag beetles are doing across their range and compare countries to each other and compare over the years. So there's the website to get involved. If you're in a stag beetle area, it'd be really great if you could help us by getting involved. We need more people to monitor their stag beetles. The instructions sound complicated, but really all you need to do is pick your own transect. And a transect is just a line, really. So if you walk down a straight road or even a curved road for 500 meters, very slowly, on a warm sunny evening just before sunset, and do this 6 times throughout the 2 months of June and July, so 6 times in total, and count the stag beetles you see. And it's as easy as that, really. But we need people to take part and try and do it every year if they can. There's the website. So please, if you are in a stag beetle area and you see stag beetles regularly, please try and do the transect. That will really help stag beetle conservation. One of the other really important things you can do is, if you don't have tree stumps of your own, or naturally occurring trees, you can build your own log pyramid, which means burying logs upright in the ground so that there's plenty of deadwood under the ground. And if you do it in like a shady area or dappled shade, that's perfect for stag beetles. There's a nice picture of a log pyramid there, and there's some more examples here from various different places, some in woodlands, some in gardens, and they're at various stages of decay. And our new project for this year is going to be Map Your Log Pile. There's the website that you need to go to, and what we're doing is encouraging people to keep a tree stump, build a log pile, or build a log pyramid. It doesn't matter whether you're in a stag beetle area or not, but we want you to tell us about your log piles and to take a photo and send it and map it on our map. And hopefully by the end of the year we'll have a map full of hundreds of deadwood habitats, and it will hopefully encourage people to value their deadwood a bit more. So these are the kind of things you can do. So the pyramid is the upright log pile that's buried and just a normal log pile is great for other insects and even mammals, frogs and toads, other invertebrates, all sorts of things. They're great. So I haven't talked about what to do if you find a stag beetle, which may start to happen over the next couple of weeks. The best thing to do if you find an adult is leave it alone, but obviously enjoy seeing it, take a photo if you want, see what it's doing. If you need to move it to a safe spot, if it's in the road or it's near your dog or it's on the pavement going to get trampled, then obviously do move it, but not very far if you can help it. They don't travel that far, so they need to stay in the similar area to where they were found. You can give them some soft fruit if you want to. They can take moisture from that, as I said earlier, so you can do that for them. And then go to our website and record your sighting. The website's there, or you can just Google Great Stag Hunt. If you find larvae while you're digging in the garden or doing some gardening, the best thing to do is rebury them in the same place with as much of the original dead wood and soil as you can, so they've got plenty of food for the rest of their life as a larva. And if it's not possible to leave them where they are because you're moving something or you're building or whatever you might be doing, then take as much of the dead wood that they're in as you can and move it to another spot and rebury in another spot that's in a similar kind of location, like if it was shaded, put it in another shady spot and bury it about the same depth, and hopefully they'll be okay. And again, you can record your sighting of a larva as well. And that is all about stag beetles, and I'm sure I've missed something, and I'm sure I've missed loads of things, but you're welcome to ask any questions. And thanks for listening, and I hope I didn't rush too much through it.
Hi Laura, thanks ever so much. That was great talk. I'll put out the call for any questions from people attending.
Okay.
I see that one has come through, which is how high a stump should you leave if you are cutting down a tree?
Oh, okay. Well, for stag beetles, you could cut it to the ground and they would still have dead wood under the ground, so that would be fine. So there's no specific height that you need to leave, but obviously the more you leave, that will be habitat for other things as well, so it's really up to you.
Right, okay. And I wondered if you were noticing any impact of climate change on the range.
We're not at the moment, no. We haven't specifically looked at climate change, but that could be an issue in the future, depending on how the climate changes. As I say, they want warm weather and they don't want too much rain, so maybe it will help stag beetles to move further north. So maybe it will actually be positive for stag beetles, but obviously there's got to be the habitat there for them as well. They've got to have the dead wood, so it's a possibility.
Thank you. Next one, similar to the other question, how deep do you bury the logs in the log pyramid?
Okay, I think that stag beetles they go up to about 30 centimetres down. So 30 centimetres would be enough, maybe a little bit more if you've got longish logs, but yeah, about a foot.
Excellent, thank you. And I think you must have said this, but I missed, and the lifespan of the larvae in logs, it's surprisingly long, isn't it?
Yeah, well, the whole life cycle could be 3 to 5 years. We did think it was originally about 7 years, but I think people are thinking it's more like 3 to 5 now. But it does depend on the weather.
So it's the weather rather than
cold weather, then it extends their life.
It's the weather rather than the food source. Sorry, did you hear that? I said it's the weather rather than the food source. And, sorry, Laura, I don't know if you can hear me still. The last question was, do you recommend burying ginger with the log pyramid?
Oh, hi. Sorry, I lost connection there for a bit.
Ah, right.
But I heard your last bit. Do I recommend burying ginger with the log? Yeah. I think I'd have to go back and read Deborah's paper, but I think, yeah, I suppose you could bury it. Or I was thinking having it on the surface, on the ground. But I suppose either way we do, because they must have very sensitive, you know, they must be very sensitive to the smell of it. So I don't know either way, sorry. I don't know the answer to that, but either way you could bury it or you could leave it on the surface, yeah. And
another question, is there any particular type of wood favoured by the larvae?
Yes, they do. They do have a preference for oak, but they will use, they're not that fussy, they will use any wood, but it's got to be broad-leaved wood. So not conifers, basically. So fruit trees, oak, ash, beech, all those kind of species.
Excellent. Yeah. I guess that would probably also tallies with why they're going to be southeastern of Britain, because that's your dominance of those types of forest. Yes, yeah, definitely. I was just going to say that lots of the things we have in our gardens, like buddleia, often people find them if you've got a big old shrub. It's not just trees, it can be shrubs as well. So any wood and rotting stuff that's under the ground from shrubs will also be useful for stag beetles as well. Great. Okay. I popped a link in for the Great Stag Hunt for those that want to get involved with that. But as you said, you can just search for Great Stag Hunt on the web. And look out for the log pile mapping from next month. Great, brilliant. Okay. Well, I think I'm not getting any more questions unless someone is typing away frantically. I'd like to say thank you ever so much, Laura, for giving us that really interesting presentation about stag beetles, and particularly interesting about all the different ways that we can help. And you know, they're such a charismatic animal. I've been lucky enough to come across them quite often, and as you say, if you're also with children, they are always fascinated by them. So really interesting talk. So thank you ever so much. And if everyone would like to look out for future events on our website, if you look up RBKC Ecology events, you will find the next things in the natural history online talks. And we're also looking forward to doing real life in the flesh events as well as the situation allows. So thank you ever so much, and I hope that we get to see people in person before too long. All right. Have a good evening, everybody.